Good morning, everyone. We have an action-packed, information-packed, content-packed episode of the Path Ahead webinar series for you today. Today, we are going to be focusing on unpacking the Montana legislative session for front country parks, trails, and recreation access. And I think I could say a little spoiler alert, but it's kind of good news. So we're going to run through the what we've received from the legislature, authorization in the legislature this year for parks and trail and grant funding programs, with a little bit of a deeper dive onto Flathead Lake and the Flathead and the partnership between Montana State Parks and state parks. So with us today, we have Bob Walker, who many of you have seen. We did legislative update sessions this year. He's the keeper of all knowledge regarding front country parks and trails. And we have Beth Shoemate, who is also the keeper of all knowledge, Montana State Parks Administrator, who's going to give us an overview of what happened this session for parks and trails. We'll have Dave Landstrom in Region 1, which is Flathead Lake. We'll talk a little bit about some of the legislative awards and how they'll be used on the ground. And then we'll have Kobe Gierke from the Montana State Parks Foundation, who will talk a little bit more about the partnership between state parks and state parks and the State Parks Foundation, particularly on our newest acquisition of State Park at Somers Beach. Next slide. So just a few housekeeping. We'll keep the questions at the end through the chat session. And if you have technical issues, you can text your issue to the team, Montana Access Project team, at 406-200-8240. Next. So I told you a little bit already. We'll highlight the legislation. We're going to overview of the state grant programs, and we'll focus a little bit on Flathead Lake, Somers Beach, and beyond. Next. A little bit about the series. In the former days, the former director of the Office of Outdoor Recreation, Rachel Schmidt, and myself started this series because, number one, we realized there was sort of lacking a community around front country parks and trails. It was very siloed. Number two, we recognized that there are multiple funding sources and multiple constituencies that come together to make inspired recreation on the ground. And number three, we started before COVID, but during COVID, it was kind of brilliant that we had this format available and able for people to plug in, share knowledge, share experiences. So we like to focus on rural communities, the impact of outdoor recreation in rural communities across the state, and how programs and inspired projects can help people move the needle on outdoor recreation in their own communities. Next. I go through these three slides, why we're here. Economic vitality. Outdoor recreation is 2.1% of the nation's GDP, and Montana is 4.7%, and we're the third highest state in the nation with a percentage of outdoor recreation. Quality of life, we can all put our stamp on this, but quality of life is the #1 reason tech leaders give for doing business in Montana. Easy access to public lands is a key component of that. Livability and quality helps us survive and thrive where we live. Next. And of course, you know, outdoor surroundings, physical health, we all know. I don't even have to say it. We all know. It's where we gathered during COVID. It's where we had safe interactions with people and got some exercise and cleared the head and cleared the mind. Next. Each one of these, I tend to focus on these key elements of a successful, inspired outdoor recreation. So this episode will focus primarily on funding, but also dig into partnerships a little bit. Next. So today we are going to be celebrating major investments in outdoor recreation. Montana's front country parks and trails saw a huge surge in use this year, but also a huge boost in funding, and particularly around investment in the infrastructure of parks and trails and front country access. Now, I included this picture, which was in the New York Times. I could have had a nice picture of people recreating on the Smith River, but I chose this picture that was in the New York Times with a headline that says pandemic causes, what I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was about a Rivergeddon in an immense amount of use down in the Bozeman and Livingston and Big Hole areas. So so that infrastructure boost could not have come at a better time. So state parks alone, the legislature authorized $17.68 million of spending, which we'll hear about in depth from Beth Shoemate. In the Flathead alone, we're looking at a $9.29 million investment. Compare that to 2017, which was a big year for parks. We made some great improvements, much needed in Bannock, fire suppression system, lighting in Lewis and Clark Caverns, and that was 5.7 million. And for outdoor recreation grant funding, the legislature authorized for this biennium this year, 4.5 million to be spent through the grant funding programs. Each of those grants will turn around, because there's a match, and leverage another 20 to 50+%. So the dollars on the ground will be multiplied. Next. You know, the reason that all of this is important is that it's really about infrastructure. Aside from the quality of life, there's a real local return on investment, and it really turns around in local communities. There isn't a ton of data on this. There's more data at the federal level and the state level, less about local. But I did want to share with you some data from the Whitefish Trail that was conducted. Analysis was conducted by Headwaters Economics. And they showed that there was a return on investment of $2.52 for every dollar invested. So when you start looking at how that turns around in local communities, whether it's for tourism, people buying things like bikes, people staying longer if they're visiting, people relocating because there's access, quality access, not just access, but quality access. Let's be clear. That then turns around more dollars again. Next slide. The other reason it's important is capacity. I mean, this picture was from last year. This is Blankenship Bridge, which is an undeveloped pullout. Loved and used by those who float the North Fork, but really lacking capacity to deal with that level of usage, with no facilities, restrooms. Maybe there's a porta potty there now. These places, like with this crush, we really need to be recreating responsibly, and we really need to be recreating and facilitating recreation in places that can handle it. And that's why the investment in outdoor recreation infrastructure that we're going to hear about today, and the increased funding that's going to be available for local communities to really move the needle on places that are worthwhile to visit, that can be maintained. That's what we're talking about, because this type of usage is not sustainable. And when you couple that with the fact that Glacier National Park, for example, instituted a ticket for entry system, it really restricts people from using the park, which actually provides what I'm hearing on the ground. It's an improved visitor experience, but it also pushes a lot of recreation and camping and recreation usage into places that are maybe more sensitive and less resilient. And really, no place was more obvious about the usage and people craving that kind of access than Somers Beach, which we'll hear about from both Dave and Kobe Gierke. Next. So this is so hot off the press. It's so hot, it burned my fingers. You guys might not even know about it, but there's now a state outdoor business alliance network, and they have just issued this report just recently, within the last few days. And what it does is it connects a lot of dots that I think are important to be connected, and particularly with relevance to local communities and with the outdoor recreation economy. So the reality, so I included a link to this report at the end. We'll make also the resources available on the website in a separate section, so you don't have to watch the whole presentation to get the links. But what the key findings are: places to get outdoors are the backbone of the outdoor recreation economy. We can't keep pretending that it's limitless. We can't keep pretending that there's no capacity issues. We've really got to be thinking about managing and maintaining that backbone. And that's what we're talking about today, is Montana's step up in investing in outdoor recreation infrastructure. So these numbers were interesting to me. Outdoor recreation nationally is 2.4 times the oil and gas industry in the GDP, 2.8 times the automotive industry, and 3 times air transportation. You wouldn't really know that from listening to the news or listening to the reports, but that's the reality. So the return on investment when you invest in the backbone is significant. And it goes into detail about how and what kinds of outdoor recreation, what kind of communities thrive in economically and attracting residents and businesses in that by providing quality outdoor recreation infrastructure. Next. I like this slide, which is in the, or this graphic, which is in the report. I'm going to go through it really quickly, because a lot of times when we talk about outdoor recreation, we talk about the outdoor recreation economy, we think tourism, but it's really much broader and much more expansive than tourism. And we just start looking at the benefits, tax revenue, cycling, return on investment that we're starting to see in these economic reports in places like even Helena has their trail system generates, and Bob, correct me here, but I think it's $4.1 or $4.4 million annually because of that investment. So you start looking at businesses, you start looking at retaining and recruiting talent, you start looking, of course you look at tourism, but it's really more than that. And that's why I like this graphic. Next. Okay, with that, I'm off my soapbox. I kind of set the stage. We're going to talk about outdoor recreation infrastructure victories. I wish I had a better word for outdoor recreation infrastructure, because it does not flow off the tongue and it sounds boring, but it's actually really those places that we get outdoors that are safe, developed, inspired, and help us navigate the travails of the world as we know it right now. There's those stable places. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and discuss what happened this session at a very high level. We'll focus in on parks, and we'll focus in on trails, and we'll focus in on grants, but I asked Bob to give us a higher level overview.
Good morning, everyone. On this very hot day, most times I encourage people to go out and enjoy the great outdoors, but quite frankly, I'm staying indoors under the air conditioner today. You might want to go to one of your city parks and recreation facilities and then go for a swim or go for a jog. But there's a lot of opportunities even on a day like this. To start out, I want to stress the fact that we had a very good network, a team that's worked on recreation and parks and conservation during the last 2 sessions. The slide you see right now shows you many of those organizations that formed the team. The thing I want to stress is that these particular organizations were obviously involved in the 2019 session, when we got a big increase in state parks money, trails money, especially those two arenas, and fishing access sites. During the 2021 session that just wrapped up a month or two back, it was a little more difficult to identify who actually took an active part because of the COVID situation. Many people were testifying virtually from their homes. Many were choosing to contact their legislators through email and telephone calls. But I'm fairly certain that all the groups you see here were actively involved in the 2021 session also. I also want to mention there are some that aren't on here. I tried to put together the list a few days ago, and I know the tourism regions were actively involved, as well as ranchers, because the ranchers had a strong support level for some of our programs or some of our bills before the legislature this year. Now, what I'm going to talk about first is two of the big ones, funding bills that affect recreation, parks, and conservation. The first one, which is the easiest to get a big grin over my face on, whether or not you supported the recreational marijuana initiative, whether or not you voted for it, whether or not you approve it, it passed. And so one of the legislature's big jobs this year is to try to figure out how to address the funds, the state tax funds of 20% that go with that program. Now, before I say anything about numbers, understand that this doesn't start until January 1st of next year. So the monies won't start coming in until after that date. The fiscal note that went along with this bill, and the bill number was HB 701, were estimates. So we always have to remember there are guesstimates by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau and the legislature. Now, the big grin on HB 701 is through a group of organizations, the team effort early on. We ended up getting somewhere between $420,000 and $650,000 of new money for each of the Trail Stewardship Grant Program, state parks, and non-game wildlife. I say somewhere in that range because the fiscal note was somewhat hard to interpret, because at one place it said they'd each get about $420,000, but specifically in language it said $650,000 for each of those programs in fiscal year 2022, which starts on July 1. So we've talked about fiscal years in the past. But here's the rest of the good stuff, is that in fiscal year 2023, which is just a little over a year off, that amount, projected amount, would go to $1,082,000 in fiscal year 2023 for the Trail Stewardship Grant Program, for state parks, and for non-game wildlife. And if you saw my wrap-up note on the legislature from this year, I sent it out 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you look back to last session, 2019, and the money we garnered for trails and recreation parks in that session, and what we're seeing out of the current session and the projections for the recreational marijuana tax, between 2019 and 2025, we see a $2 million increase that we didn't have before 2019 in the Trails Grant Program, for state parks, and those are big ones. So I just want to be sure everybody sees how successful this team has been in the last 2 sessions. Now, the other one that many of you have heard about, and most of us are still confused about, was House Bill 632, which tried to allocate and appropriate the money from the American Rescue Plan Act, the federal money coming in. The analysts projected $2.7 billion, and our legislature had to struggle through this to decide how best to use those monies. Now, I'm going to mention a good place. There's something else that I want to be sure to address right off the bat is it's for infrastructure. And of course, they pushed sewer and water, broadband, and health benefits at the local level. But keep in mind that infrastructure also includes parks and recreation facilities. And let's face it, they're not only recreation, but they provide health benefits. And they should fit into this program, especially at the local level, at the county or city level. Now, I say there's confusion over this one. My wife sat through an hour-and-a-half Zoom training session yesterday. It was primarily targeted at water systems. And all I can say is the best thing you can do is contact your city mayor, contact your county commissioners, and go to them with a request for some of this funds for any projects you have online for parks and recreation facilities. Now, so you'll find out the exact numbers, and I have them here if anybody has a question, but the Montana League of Cities and Towns, just Google it. I have their webpage address here. Just Google Montana League of Cities and Towns, and they actually have a list of the amounts of money that are already on the way to the cities, incidentally, from this program. And it's, so go to that webpage. With the county money, the county's getting the cash, the Montana Association of Counties, Google the Montana Association of Counties. That's your best way to go. And on that, toward the top, there's a place you can click on the American Rescue Plan Act funds to the counties. There's a list by county of how much every county is going to get from this program. And actually, I read on one of those web pages, and it was the paper last week, that the checks should be received by the cities and counties by today or tomorrow. I guess the other most important thing I say about this is that act now, don't wait. Because I know Julie, my wife, found out yesterday that for water projects, at least, they have to have applications in. This is under the state program, the state grant program. They have to have applications in by July 15th. Things are going to happen fast. So my suggestion to you is act now, don't wait. I'm going to go on to some of the other bills now that Beth Shoemate will talk in a little bit about House Bill 2 and House Bill 5, and House Bill 5 is where the grant programs are located. So Beth, we'll wait for you on that one because I know you've got some detail. Some other parks and recreation bills that were signed into law. House Bill 102, it just depends on your perspective on this one. It was revised current gun laws and allows concealed weapons without permits in many facilities. And why this had some impact to trails and recreation is there's some cities that had rules and regulations that did not allow the carry of weapons within their parks or facilities. So it did affect some cities and counties or cities and parks around the state, not positively. I'll just flat out say it. So that one actually is being challenged right now in the court, I know at least by the university systems, the Board of Regents, and I'm sure it's going to be challenged by others. House Bill 554, it requires legislative approval prior to a congressional act on national heritage areas and national historic trails in Montana. Now, the reason I bring this up is there's a group out of Billings, Mike Penfold's kind of the lead, who's been trying to get the Bozeman Historic Trail identified as a National Historic Trail. They've been working on it for a few years. They were getting close, but unfortunately, because of this law now, they have to get approval from the state legislature before they can submit it to the National Park Service for designation. It just delays the whole process, and all the work that Mike Penfold and his group have done is delayed again. So this is another one I can say now, the session's over, not a good bill. Senate Bill 115 clarified the approval process for land acquisition by the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They are now required legally to have those projects taken before the State Land Board. And which again, the problem with that is some of these conservation easements take years to negotiate. And now, even after it's gone through all those processes, it has to go before the State Land Board. And I'll say it again the way I see it. It's a politically oriented State Land Board. And it could kill a project that's been in the mill for 3 or 4 years. So that's another one that passed, which I'm disappointed to see. Finally, Senate Joint Resolution 5 asks, and I say ask, the National Park Service to include Sakakawea on signs for the Lewis and Clark Trail. But that'll be a decision made by the National Park Service. Let's see. Some bills that failed, and I noticed, Diana, on one of your slides, you talk about e-bikes. I'm going to talk bicycles in general because there were 3 bills that all failed. Let's just say that House and Senate transportation committees have never been real positive about bicycles. I sat in enough of their meetings to know that. House Bill 184 was a bicycle safety bill, I should say, that failed, but it was not supported by the bicycle community. Mainly because of requirements that included for riding on the far right side of the roadway, certain types of equipment and clothing. It failed miserably. E-bikes, that's the one I saw on your slide, Diane. It identified 3 classifications of e-bikes, and it allowed state and local authorities to decide if e-bikes should not be allowed. And that was part of the problem with the bill, is currently it's they have to be, they can be allowed only after public action. And they were inconsistent with national parks, or I should say, U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management regulations right now. So they were inconsistent with that. And the big issue was their use on natural surface backcountry trails that are designated as non-motorized. That's the big one that probably killed the e-bike bill this year. And finally, there was a suggestion for an interim study to study long distance trails across Montana. It failed. It didn't make up the deadline. With that, there's several other bills that failed in the legislative session, but I'm going to wrap up by just saying, no matter how your perspective on this session was about the general nature of climate, we did great in the areas of recreation and parks and conservation. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Bob. And I do have a copy of Bob's report. Many of you are on his email list, but I will get that put up on the website. Montana Access Project team will get it on the website and make that available for you to go deeper and really look at Bob's incredible analysis. Actually, I think we'll put all of his reports on there. I'm going to turn it over to Beth now, who's going to take that little bit of a deeper dive into what this legislative session meant for state parks and for outdoor recreation grants. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you, Diane, and good morning, everybody. Beth Shoemate. I'm the Parks Division Administrator here at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and excited to be with you and just share some of the success of the 2021 session, and just also share a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to better address, including visitation and some of our maintenance across our state park system. And then at the tail end, I also want to provide some highlights about our outdoor recreation programs, which you can hopefully tap into some of those resources as far as your community-based goals and dreams that you want to try to improve on as far as infrastructure or just maintenance in general. So with that, I think if you can change to the first slide there, if you don't mind, thank you. We all know we live in a really wildly popular outdoor recreation hub in Montana. And we have some of the most splendid opportunities for people to access our wonderful outdoor spaces. And Diana already kind of shared just some of what we dealt with, especially last year with the changes in dealing with the pandemic and how we literally turned from an indoor society to an outdoor one overnight. And coupled now with a very real migration pattern from urban to rural, there could be no more important time for us to all be on the same team as far as making sure that we are really trying to provide those outdoor recreation access points and that we're taking good care of those resources so it is a sustainable system into the future. So we have now crossed the threshold this last year into over 3 million visitors. And there's no end in sight in the short term or long term, 3 million visitors to our state park system, I should say. We have 55 state parks that touch every corner of this magnificent state. And we've worked really hard to improve our visitation methodology in trying to make sure that we have some improved traffic counters at every single access point, even those access points on our trail systems. Lone Pine State Park comes to mind here as far as trying to make sure that some of those folks are accessing our parks on trails and at those trailheads. So also sometimes by water, especially on the Flathead. And I know we're going to talk about the Flathead quite a bit here in depth when Dave provides his presentation. So if we can go to the next slide. This is not the complete list of our entire House Bill 5 package. So just a reminder for everybody, in case you're unfamiliar with what is House Bill 5. House Bill 5 is the very large statewide acquisition, development, and maintenance funding package for the state of Montana. And so within that, we had the largest package ever within our, as far as FWP, and we were able to secure just within the state parks and outdoor recreation portfolio, a $29 million package. So that breakdown, again, this is not, I didn't list every single one of those projects, but I wanted to just highlight some of the more significant ones and just show everybody what we're trying to work towards and address. And so I also just, in prep for the 21 session, I was trying to be very thoughtful about what are we hearing from just a national perspective as far as what are we going to need to be anticipating as far as the use of our outdoor recreation sites. And I'll just share that some of the national trends that we are experiencing is that people desire those shorter travel distances in those more remote locations, hence the influx into states like Montana, which we are all experiencing. And 55% of the recent RV and camper sales are from first-time buyers. So what that means is we have a whole lot of newcomers in the state. And so we've been working really hard in the last year to provide what we call a Recreate Responsibly campaign. This is on our website, and I know we're sharing some resources later on in the presentations here. And it's a really great opportunity for some of those people that you're maybe seeing come into your towns or communities. You can share this link on the website to our Recreate Responsibly campaign. And it really does provide some of that just general information for those newcomers that maybe don't know how to even set up a campsite, or what do they need to bring when they're going on an overnight trip into the backcountry. So those are just some of the things that we're trying to kind of get ahead on, or what is it like to recreate in bear country and how can I truly be safe? So within this, I would like to just touch on a few of these in a little more detail. So if you can go to, actually, before you slip to the next slide here, I just want to mention that the Flathead Lake Recreation Access Package, which again, Dave Landstrom is really going to take the lead on breaking this down and what this means for improving access on Flathead Lake. This $7.89 million does include Somers Beach State Park, which is on the north shore of the Flathead, as well as Montebello Fishing Access Site, which is a newly acquired site as well. And so again, I'm going to let Dave touch on all of those in more detail. What we are anticipating trying to do, though, is at least some initial development, maybe even yet this summer, fall timeframe, just to at least be able to open up Somers Beach and allow for the public to recreate on that site. We also were successful in Yellow Bay. You see the Yellow Bay listed there for 1.2 million. And that project involves a reconfiguration of the entrance coming off Highway 83. For anybody that has been into the Yellow Bay site, you can probably attest to just how it's not the safest access point. And so we know that we need to reconfigure that access point, as well as upgrade some of those interior roads and address the limited camping opportunities on that particular side of Flathead. And then you'll see at the very bottom here, we also have Flathead Lake Islands. And so what we're trying to do here is we actually have a 2009 management plan. Again, I'm going to let Dave talk about it, but we're just looking to try and actually manage the recreational use that we're experiencing on those islands. And so again, I'll let Dave share more. So if you can now go to the next slide. So within that list, you probably also noticed that we have a $2.5 million package that will address major maintenance projects across all of our state parks across the state. And so we truly are doubling down on maintenance. This picture here is a slide of the inventory of Salmon Lake State Park, just outside of Seeley Lake. We have now geolocated over 5,000 infrastructure points of all of our. And this allows us to readily access key information at every single state park. This allows us to then make sense of the inherent complexity involved with maintaining all of this infrastructure. And we also now have been able to attach a critical operations document to any one of those types of very complex systems. So let's just take a water system as an example. So an improved water system, you want to make sure that the maintenance staff actually know exactly how to maintain it, how to do the water testing, because this is a public health water supply. And so we want to make sure that we are doing our best to provide that very good service to the customer. And a big part of that, of course, is maintenance and improving some of that core infrastructure within our state parks. So this is a really exciting one. This is the second time now. The 19 session, we also had a major maintenance package. So this is the second one, and we anticipate 65 plus projects. And also, and part of those projects would include such things as like removing hazard trees, re-roofing some of our buildings and things like that, or asphalt maintenance in our parking lots, and signage upgrades as well. So really excited about this one. Next slide, please. The Smith River, the iconic Smith River. So what we have currently underway is we are updating the 2009 Smith River Outdoor Recreation Management Plan. So as you can imagine, this is a rather extensive effort. We anticipate that we will be able to have an updated management plan for the Smith, hopefully ideally completed by sometime next spring. So we're looking at about a year-long process. We want to encourage and have as much public involvement as we can possibly gain throughout the course of the next year. So we have just started this updated planning process. But what we're hoping to do as far as infrastructure improvements on the Smith, I think most people are probably aware there's really only one main access point on the Smith River, and that's Camp Baker. And so part of what we're trying to address is Camp Baker what we actually want it to be? Should it be a different type of site? Should we have camping there? Or should we try to encourage the floaters to actually maybe stay overnight in White Sulphur Springs to boost their local economy even more? So it's just really thinking about all of those things as far as what do we want Camp Baker to truly be? Is it day use only? Is it camping or not? If it's not, what does that do to some of the other access points and camping opportunities in that area? So more to come as far as the Smith River and this planning effort, but we also know that we just want to make sure that we are taking care of this precious resource. So we're excited about this planning effort. Next slide, please. I also just wanted to mention one of our flagship parks, Lewis and Clark Cavern State Park. If you haven't been, please try to take the time to go and maybe do a cave tour, maybe just go camping. This is a shot at our lower campground at Lewis and Clark Caverns. There's a great trail system. And this project that we secured now is to construct and improve the failing wastewater treatment system. So it's really that kind of underground systems that we're trying to improve and upgrade in order for us to have an improved comfort station, an RV dump station, as well as an improved camping experience for the visitor. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of Fort Owen State Park. If you have not heard, Fort Owen is getting a whole lot of love lately. We have been able to take this 1 acre, it's literally a postage size state park down in the Bitterroot Valley. And we have been able to add an additional acre thanks to our relationship with the adjacent private landowner there. And we have completely reconfigured the parking area. So we have a better flow of traffic coming into Fort Owen. And all of the infrastructure here with this $390,000 package that we also secured through House Bill 5. We have a very great partnership going on with Kobe Gerke and the State Parks Foundation, who were really the ones that were able to secure this private funding source. That's the source of this $390,000 through a philanthropic donor for the improvements at Fort Owen State Park, which will really address that historic preservation projects, improve interpretation, and all those good things. So really excited about that project. Next slide, please. So what we also learned in looking at the national trends is people really want to have the glamping experience. You've probably heard of glamping, it's glamorous camping. And we have been really working hard behind the scenes in the last year. We have a diversified lodging team to really try to assess what can we possibly make to increase the overall inventory of campsites and make those available, because as we all know, there's a lack of inventory as far as lodging right now, especially with the significant visitation occurring. So this is a $500,000 diversified lodging package that will allow us to put in some of those types of campsites that could include cabins or maybe some more yurts, maybe some just really simple platform style tents where you at least have some type of shelter, which is kind of what I was trying to show here, where it's just really kind of a bare bones camp setup, but people love this kind of stuff and we can do this for a pretty low cost. So we're hoping to be able to work with the State Parks Foundation on this really exciting, just improving our lodging inventory in general. And then I'll just touch on the last couple ones that were also mentioned there. Is we're also working to try and improve some of our exhibits within our visitor centers and our interpretive panels that you come across, especially at some of our historic and cultural based parks. And we also have another access point at Milltown State Park that we secured, which used to be the Bonner Development Group on the over by the Bonner side of Milltown, and we're excited to be able to provide at least pedestrian access to that point in Milltown State Park. So with that, I'm going to now turn really quick because I know time is up, but I wanted to at least mention this is your opportunity. The slide that you see here is all of those outdoor recreation grant programs that we administer and manage here within FWP, and we allocate these funds out annually to the local communities, to those trail-based organizations. So I'll just really quickly highlight that we have the Recreational Trails Program, which is a federally based program, And we just allocated out, I believe it was 45 projects just last month, totaling 1.5 million. If it's trail related, it can be funded out of both the Recreational Trails Program as well as the new Montana Trail Stewardship Grant Program that Bob just mentioned. We had the success in the 19 session, thanks in part to the Montana Trails Coalition and so many others behind the scenes that worked so hard to establish that funding source through Senate Bill 24. And the funding source is the light motor vehicle registration fee, which was an increase from $6 to $9, and $1.37 of that increase goes directly into this Montana Trail Stewardship Grant Program. We did not anticipate being able to allocate out 1.5 million out of this program. And that just goes to show how much people love trails and how much they support state parks and trails in general across Montana, because they are definitely opting in for that $9 fee. Then we also have a couple more here. We have the OHV grant program, as well as a summer motorized trail pass grant program. And we also oversee the snowmobile program. Those motorized programs do a ton of trail maintenance and really provide that front country access and really keep those trails maintained, which then oftentimes lead to the backcountry and some of those more wilderness type locations. And then I wanted to make sure I touch on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This, we now have a rolling grant cycle. I believe we have 11 applications in from a wide variety of communities, some as small as Winnett, Montana, which is just awesome to see a tiny little town like Winnett applying to Land and Water Conservation Fund. One of the hurdles in this grant program, though, is that 50% match. So trying to really work with those communities to make sure that they have that match secured, which is why we went to a rolling grant cycle to make it easier for the timing. So next slide. So this is just the overall as far as how many applications we're getting in, the total amount that you're seeing actually requested by all those different organizations or local communities, and then how much is being allocated out and the number of those awards. Next slide. And here are some of the contacts that I just wanted to make sure that you can actually call these people up. These are our program specialists that can provide all of those details as far as it relates to any of those programs, so you can better understand what's required, what are the eligibility requirements. Next slide. All right, I am done. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and please always feel free to reach out. Thanks, Diane.
Beth, thank you. Wow, you really packed it in. Like I said, all of that will be available. And I also I put a link in the chat. We did meet with, through this series with Michelle McNamee, and there was a lot, she did a great in-depth deep dive into the details and timing of those grant and funding programs with links and processes, etc. Of course, you can reach out to them, but I did put that link in so you can have the background. Next, deeper dive into the Flathead. I'm going to turn it over to Dave Landstrom. Thank you, Beth.
And thank you, Diane. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Dave Landstrom, Regional State Park Manager in Kalispell, and my crew and I manage 13 state parks here in Northwest Montana, along with a pretty vast groomed snowmobile trail system throughout the Northwest. But I get the great pleasure of sharing with you what's really a success of this recent legislative session. And it pertains specifically to improve public access on Flathead Lake. And as you'll see from this graphic, one that Diane so kindly provided, the vast majority of Flathead Lake shoreline is private, just about 90%, and that's depicted there in yellow along the shoreline. And HB 5 authorizes the department to spend pretty close to $8 million to acquire and develop new public access, as well as to invest another $2.4 million in existing recreation sites. Next. Flathead Lake is perhaps the poster child for what we witnessed last year as a result of the pandemic. You know, the state park system as a whole saw a nearly 30% increase in one single calendar year you know, we're approaching that 3.5 million visits to the state park system. And Flathead Lake, all units, I'll describe that in a moment, were responsible for nearly 500,000 of those visits and was the most visited state park in Montana's park system. Next. When we refer to Flathead Lake State Park, it's the sum of its parts. There are 6 park units that make up the park. Going down the east side, there's Wayfarers, Yellow Bay, and Finley Point. And along the west side, we have Big Arm, Wild Horse Island, and West Shore State Park. Next. One of the truly big successes is that investment piece of House Bill 5 that I mentioned, which allows us to invest in upgrades to existing recreation facilities. And Yellow Bay unit of Flathead Lake State Park is due for some love. This is one of Montana's older state park units. It was brought into the system in 1941 and is actually a subset of the Flathead Lake Biological Station campus. So this was legislatively authorized in the 40s and it's small, it's only 15 acres, but it provides really critical access along the east side of Flathead Lake. The primary park development occurred in the late 60s, and really the last significant investment in this site was in the 90s. And we've certainly done a number of you know, smaller projects and some Band-Aid projects, but this will be the first facelift that the park has really had in a long time. Next slide, please. As Beth pointed out, the priority for investment at this park will be improving the safety and usability of the access to the park. It's pretty scary coming in off the highway right now and leaving, as well as upgrades to visitor amenities. You know, we're going to do as much as we can given the cost of construction these days right now. You can see from the larger photo there that this location on the lake is simply stunning. And from the lower photo, you can see sort of what we're dealing with there at Yellow Bay. It's a small site, extremely old, all gravel, and it's quickly overwhelmed during summer visitation when we get really, really heavy use there. So the hope is to improve the safety and usability of the park, and we'll do as much as we can with that 1.2 million. Next slide. This is a really neat project that's coming up. We're excited and been trying to make this happen for some time. And so the State Parks Division is working with the Wildlife Division, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, to improve management of recreation that occurs on a series of islands in Flathead Lake that are known as WHPAs, Wildlife Habitat Protection Areas. These islands were purchased in the 1950s to propagate Canada geese. And as most folks will see for themselves, the Canada goose populations have dramatically recovered. And these islands have really become de facto parks, and they're heavily used and very, very popular. This photo here is Cedar Island and Shelter Island. Cedar is the public one, and that's a 23-acre parcel that is really, really popular for people to camp on and day use, paddle to, boat to, etc. Bird Island is a 30-acre island on the east side of the lake, also quite popular. And then there are 2 smaller rock outcrops, essentially, that are less than an acre combined, which are O'Neill and Douglas Island, but people still use them for recreation and have become, these are very popular recreation sites and have been for decades. Next slide. Here are the locations of those islands, and HB provides authority for FWP to invest $200,000 for infrastructure on these islands. So the intent is to still keep them as a very rustic experience as they are now, but this funding will allow us to address some of the impacts that are occurring there. If you've been on Wild Horse Island before, you may have noticed compost latrine there. We're hopeful that we can install those on Bird and Cedar Island as well. And we're going to use the 2009 Flathead Lake Islands Management Plan as a guide for this investment. And we're working to update that plan and get it back out in front of the public for another review. And we'll, the goal again will be to maintain the habitat that, that's been preserved there now, and also continue to provide really cool recreation opportunity. Next slide. I saw in the chat, someone was asking about Montebello fishing access. This isn't a state park, but I thought it was important to add this into the presentation. This is part of that acquisition and development part of HB 5. And this authorized FWP to acquire, and this acquisition has occurred, just about a 15-acre parcel near Dayton on the west side of the lake. And this one was in partnership with the Montana Outdoor Legacy Foundation. And it's a long-time family to the area, owned by this family who was really, really keen to see this property become public. And so much so that they spent about 3 years trying to make it happen. And they ultimately sold it through this partnership with the Outdoor Legacy Foundation to FWP for $400,000 below appraised value. And that was testament to their desire to see this in public hands. So that site also has development funding in HB 5, and that process is underway. Next slide. And lastly, as Beth and Diane have both alluded to, very soon to be Montana's newest state park unit in the system. So we'll have to redo all our literature that now says 51 state parks, but we hope to be able to close on this parcel later this summer. It is 106 acres of shoreline on the northwest side of Flathead Lake near the community of Somers. And it has been in public use for decades due to the kindness of the previous owners, well, the current owners actually, and they've provided public access there. It's really a part of interesting and unique part of the Flathead Valley's more recent history. And we've been working in partnership with Montana State Parks Foundation and the Flathead Land Trust to bring this into the system. HB 5 authorizes, it's approximately a $2.7 million acquisition fund. That final number is being determined as we speak. And it uses the state side of LWCF in combination with other department funds for the acquisition. And then both Montana State Parks Foundation and the Flathead Land Trust have been doing some very impressive fundraising to bring into the fold some development and operational funding. And as Beth pointed out, our hope is to close on this and provide some very rudimentary amenities so that the public can begin to enjoy the site. And then we'll embark on a visioning process with the community and stakeholders to find out what this park is going to look like and how we'd like to function, have it function in the future. So with that transition to Kobe and his discussion of the Montana State Parks Foundation role in the acquisition of Somers.
I'm going to hop in here. We're running just a titch late. If people want to hang with us, we'll hang. It's important stuff. We often talk about our defeats, but we don't get to celebrate our victories. So I hope you'll stick around with us to do that. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Kobe.
All right. I'll try to keep my comments brief, as I know you're all busy. Andy, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. They don't need to know about me. And let's do one more. I want to talk about Somers Beach and just a few lessons from the partnership that has brought Somers Beach into being. And I will just state that partnerships are extremely important to doing this type of work. 55 state parks across Montana is great. 56 is even better. And we're very, very near to that 56th state park, but that's because of great partnerships along the way. So if you're going to be a good partner, you got to get in early. You got to know what your goals are and who you're going to work with. And you have to be a part of these conversations from the get-go. We first heard about Somers Beach about 2.5, 3 years ago from the Slider family who attended one of our fundraisers and said, hey, have we got a project for you? They ended up working with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and others, including the Flathead Land Trust, to develop this idea of selling Somers Beach to the state of Montana to be developed into a state park, instead of selling it on the private market to be developed into yet more condos and private access for the lake. So get in early. That's really important. You can't be a good partner if you don't know what's going on. You also have to learn to walk before you learn to run and before you can fly. So we didn't start off, at Somers Beach trying to match a $125,000 challenge grant from the Sliders family, which is ongoing and you should absolutely contribute to, because we need to make this match by the end of the summer. We started off much more modestly. We started off at Lone Pine State Park just up the road, paying for new archery targets and visitor kiosks when you come to the park. We developed onto hiring MCC crews for habitat restoration and landing site signage at Wild Horse Island. And then we helped out with the Big Arm permanent recreational easement acquisition that happened a couple of years ago. And finally, we're on to a big, juicy project that we can sink our teeth into now and for years to come at Somers Beach, as we raise this initial funding for the immediate operation and development of the park, and then long-term be involved in the planning and decision-making as far as the amenities that are going to make that park a special place for years to come. So I tell you all of this because in order for you to effectively leverage private resources like grants, like individual gifts, you have to be a good partner to folks like Montana State Parks or FWP or the U.S. Forest Service. And you have to do that by tracking similar goals and similar visions. And Beth Shoemate alluded to that earlier with the alternative lodging or diversified lodging, as she calls it, across the state. Andy, you can go to the next slide or two, please. Quick view of Somers Beach. Sorry, folks, I was talking, not looking. But diversified lodging is one where Beth and her team know that they can generate more of their own revenue. They can offer more of the experiences that park visitors are looking for by offering diversified lodging. We can help do that. And we have done that by providing the sort of a pilot project at Makoshika State Park, where we just delivered our first yurt to that park last week. And at Chief Plentycoo, where we are working with the Billings School District and Montana State Parks to develop a tiny house for staff and volunteers. Next slide, please. And at Finley Point, where we're looking to develop cabins on cabin sites that were part of the facelift that happened to that park back in 2017. So be a good partner, know what your partner's vision and goals are, help guide that, and maybe provide the pilot projects that can help them leverage more federal or state dollars from the legislature. Go ahead, next slide, Andy. This works at scale too. Once you've done these smaller scale things like Wild Horse Island, like Makoshika, you start to find yourself having success on big things. And Beth alluded to this earlier and talked about this as a $390,000 legislative authorization for Fort Owen State Park. That's not the whole of it at all. Before the authorization was ever even considered, we contributed about $72,000 for the purchase of an additional acre for Fort Owen State Park. We did this all through a grant from a very generous family foundation, the Helmsley Charitable Trust. And we're hoping that this park will be reopened to the public by the end of June, as the parking lot development, new road access, and new visitor amenities are already done. They're already in place. The project's moving forward really quick. Now we get to focus on the detail work of restoring those old structures and providing better educational and interpretive materials at the park. Next slide, please, Andy. So be a good partner. Figure out what your partner's goals are. Start small, learn to walk before you run, and achieve a few things, and your successes will grow. And you can leverage all those private dollars into the cause that you care about. That's all my time. Thank you. And contribute to Somers Beach State Park. We got to finish this thing out. Thank you.
I put a link in the slide, in the chat. I put a link in the, it is also in the presentation. And I have to disclose, I am a co-founder and board chair of the Montana State Parks Foundation. So I'm pleased to be working on all of these facets of developing outdoor recreation. And truthfully, where we started 5 years ago and where we are now is light years. Thanks to the park staff, thanks to the strong partnerships, thanks to the robust volunteer and NGO work from folks like Bob Walker. So we're going to wrap up here. I want to, we've been doing these monthly. Next month is, we're going to feature Big Sky, which is an unincorporated community. And I'm calling it No Town, No Problem, right? We'll see. There are definitely challenges and opportunities to developing front country recreation in communities that are not incorporated. And then in August, we're going to have Beth again. Thank you, Beth, to talk about, I called it Nature RX, but it's about how getting into nature, how exercising and using outdoor recreation infrastructure that is inspired and helpful to health. How we're going to look at programs and communities that have done that successfully or are trying. Next slide. All right, so the contact information is here. Again, we will post both the presentation and the video to the website in a day or two, and I'm going to wrap it up. If you want to follow on Facebook, Montana Access Project, you can sign up on our website for notices and newsletters and whatever. And there's also kind of a working group called the Front Country Recreation Alliance, because we all know that we don't just use trails and we don't just use parks. We use river access and water access and the whole spectrum of outdoor recreation. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.